Welcome to Dark Echoes, where the shadows come alive, and every story whispers a nightmare. If you're ready to face your deepest fears, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss what's lurking next. Like, share, and dive into the darkness with us, if you dare.
It's early morning in a city that feels alive. Streets are just beginning to stir as the sun breaks over the skyline. A young man, let's call him Jake, rubs his eyes, stretches, and heads to the kitchen for his usual coffee. Outside, life goes on. Cars honk, people chatter on their way to work, children rush to school. Jake doesn't know it yet, but this will be the last normal morning of his life. As he sips his coffee, scrolling aimlessly on his phone, something catches his eye. An emergency alert flashes across the screen. At first, he ignores it, just another spam notification. But then, the silence of the morning is shattered by an unfamiliar sound. A distant thump, then another, louder this time. It's almost like someone's banging on the door. He walks to the window, peering out. He sees people moving quickly, their steps hurried. Someone running across the street, their face twisted in panic, eyes wide with fear. He can hear the sirens now, distant but growing louder. He glances back at his phone. Another alert. It's not a spam notification. It's a warning. A warning he can't ignore anymore. Within hours, the entire city begins to unravel. The streets once filled with life, now churn with terror. Cars crash, people scream, chaos spreads like wildfire. What started as an ordinary morning is now the beginning of a nightmare. A nightmare where survival isn't about food, or water, or shelter. Jake finds himself trapped in his apartment. The sounds of distant screams fill the air, mingling with the unmistakable shuffle of something, or someone, far more dangerous. As the hours turn into days, he realizes this is not an ordinary crisis. For 20 long days, Jake will fight to survive in a city overrun by the undead. The clock is ticking, and the world as Jake knows it is slipping away. It all started so suddenly. The first sirens wailed, piercing the morning calm. Car alarms blared as vehicles skidded to a halt, blocking roads. People scrambled to flee in every direction. The once familiar skyline now loomed over a battlefield, its towering glass and steel reflecting panic instead of progress. Buildings were left abandoned, windows left ajar, as the city's heart was ripped out in the span of mere minutes. Then came the screams. Faint at first, but unmistakable, piercing cries that echoed through the now empty streets. For Jake, the reality didn't hit immediately. Like many others, he assumed it was some kind of isolated incident, a riot, a misunderstanding. Even the authorities seemed unsure, issuing vague warnings. The news was scattered, showing blurry footage of panicked crowds and people running for their lives. Jake's first sign came when he heard frantic knocking at his door. He hesitated, unsure of what to do. He opened it slowly, cautiously, and was met with a man, bloodied, disheveled, his clothes torn as if he'd been through a war. His eyes were wild with terror as he pleaded for help before collapsing on the floor. A chill ran down Jake's spine. The question circled in his mind, but before he could process anything further, another sound reached his ears. The unmistakable sound of something, or someone, shuffling just outside the door. The world outside his apartment had begun to disintegrate. And inside, it was only getting worse. Day one felt like the calm before the storm. But as the day wore on, things began to shift. The first signs of the infection spread. By day two, the internet was down. Jake sat there, staring at a blank screen, a haunting silence filling the room. Had he been abandoned? Was this the end of it all? By day three, it became undeniable. He was trapped. The world outside had completely broken apart. His apartment, his once safe space, had turned into a prison. There was no one left to help. His window was his only connection to the outside world now. Seeing only glimpses, stray figures darting between alleyways, figures stumbling unnaturally. Some were still human, some were not. The first day of silence stretched into the third. Jake's isolation began to weigh on him, The fear in his chest, the confusion, the disbelief, it all mixed together, a cocktail of anxiety and dread. By the fourth day, he started hearing sounds that weren't there before, the scraping of nails against his door, low growls. Every creak in the building, every faint sound, made him jump. The city, once filled with life, now looked like a forgotten relic. Cars were strewn haphazardly across the roads, some with doors left wide open, as if the drivers had fled in a panic. Inside his apartment, Jake sat alone. The isolation gnawed at him. No phone calls. No messages. Not even a sound from his neighbors. Every movement sent a jolt of terror through him. One day, Jake hears a knock at his door. Hesitant, he approaches and slowly opens it, his heart pounding in his chest. Standing in front of him is someone he thought was gone. Is it them? Jake wonders. The person's presence beckons him to make a choice. Could it really be? They exchange uneasy glances, words barely breaking through the silence. Jake questions everything. Can he trust this person, or should he stay barricaded? As the days pass, he begins to lower his guard. They share stories, fears, and hopes. But then, on the 14th day, something shifts. The person's behavior changes, their answers become evasive. The trust they built begins to crack. Jake is left wondering if he's been deceived. Then, it happens. A loud noise from the street, shuffling, groaning. The undead are close. The once quiet city has become a battleground. The sounds, they're getting closer. Jake whispers, his voice tight with fear. The world beyond is on fire. And all I have left is my own will to survive. After 20 long days, Jake finally opens the door, stepping into a city that has been irrevocably changed. The streets, once bustling with life, are now silent and littered with destruction. The undead have overtaken much of the city, but some survivors remain. The world he knew is gone, and the horror has now seeped into him. Jake, too, has changed. He's hardened, a product of survival in a world that no longer makes sense. As he walks through the wreckage, he reflects on what he's become. The city may be silent, Jake thinks, but the story isn't over, at least not for me. The question lingers. Who is the real monster now? What would you have done if you were in Jake's shoes? Could you survive 20 days trapped in a world falling apart? If this story gripped you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales. Stay tuned for our next video.